the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you are answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
So thank you again. Just by way of background, I have a degree in civil engineering with a minor in engineering management. But again, to age myself, the degree I have is civil engineering, but it's actually what you would call environmental engineering today. It was before they actually had something called environmental engineering. So then when I went to law school, I think this was way before sustainability as a term was in vogue. But when I went to law school, it was actually, I think, the first book I read since high school, because in my 4 years of engineering school, we didn't do a whole lot of reading back then. So it was a great way to think out of the other side of my brain for a while. But anyway, so alternative fuels and vehicles. Just to orient you, these are actual vehicles that are on the road. This is a propane-powered school bus. This is a compressed natural gas jitney bus. If you've been to Atlantic City, you've seen these buses running around. There's 190 of them on the road. Natural gas garbage truck, natural gas UPS van, and this is a Honda Civic, a natural gas Honda Civic that, as part of a promotion, actually drove across the country a couple of times back and forth, and ended up here in New Jersey, and we did a big event with them on the boardwalk in Atlantic City. But anyway, so I run an organization called the New Jersey Clean Cities Coalition. We're an independent nonprofit, and we have to go through a formal process to be designated as a Clean Cities Coalition by the U.S. Department of Energy. So we're the only entity in the state that is exclusively focused on public-private partnerships to reduce petroleum in the transportation sector. And we'll talk about how we do that. So it's all about building relationships and strengthening markets. We connect fleets to fuel providers. We connect technology vendors with service providers, infrastructure providers. We offer training and information doing things like this, specialized technical assistance. When there are funding opportunities available through the Department of Energy or EPA or anyone else, that makes me a very popular person, because everybody thinks that I have some control over how those funds are doled out, and sometimes I have some influence, but I wouldn't say control. We provide public recognition to fleets that are reducing their petroleum footprint and using alternative fuels. And we collect data and track progress as a government-funded organization, that comes with the territory. But the key facet of the Clean Cities program nationally, and I should say that there's 90 Clean Cities coalitions across the country. There's only one here in New Jersey. Some states have multiple coalitions. But the key is that, unlike most federal programs, this is a Department of Energy program where they provide seed funding to locally based groups. And those locally based groups have the ability to do what's best in their community. Some technologies work better in some situations than others, in some climates than others, some geographies better than others. So it's up to the locally based coalition to do that, but was supported by the national resources of the program. So we've been around actually since 1997, but I got involved in 2009, and originally the program was actually part of the state, the Board of Public Utilities, but in 2009 we took it out of the state and turned it into an independent nonprofit. And I don't need to read this to you. You can see that we represent the broad spectrum of public and private interests across the state. And we've secured more than $18 million worth of grant funds for our stakeholders in the last couple of years, and that allowed leveraging of those funds with private and other non-federal funds to invest in some pretty good projects here that I'll talk a little bit more about. That, you know, that money probably would not have been spent in New Jersey had it not been for the federal investment. So we'll see what happens with federal investment in energy programs, but that's another story. And we do get the annual seed funding. Again, I highlighted the word annual because right now the President's recommended budget for 2018 zeroes out the program. So good thing that I came to talk to you this year, because I'm not sure I'll be around next year, but we'll see.
Congress will not go for it. Never
We'll
do
see.
but again, let's see.
The Congress did put the right language into their version of the budget, but they didn't put the funds in,
That's what
which
they-
means it's going to be up to Rick Perry's discretion. So anyway, that's for another discussion. Clean cities. So what's the reason for the program? So the program overall advances the energy, economic, and environmental security, and those are three key terms: the energy, economic, and environmental security of the U.S. by supporting local actions to cut petroleum. And we do that by reducing petroleum consumption, reducing greenhouse gases, and reducing the imported petroleum. This is the portfolio of technologies that Clean Cities coalitions across the country work on. We don't all work on every one of these, but this is the basic technologies. It's alternative fuels, it's idle reduction programs, it's increased fuel economy, it's the use of hybrids, which, you know, hybrid technology hasn't been around all that long. It's kind of ubiquitous now, but for certain models anyway, but it's really relatively new technology when you look at, you know, the 120-year history of the automobile. And we, you know, I tend to work more with fleets, because to me that is the better bang for the buck, if you will. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But now with the advent of electric vehicles, a lot of the discussion has been on light-duty vehicles and consumer focus. But one thing that's very important, besides the three reasons for the program that I spoke about, one of my themes since Superstorm Sandy has been the need for fuel diversification. If you think about it, there's lots of different ways that we generate electricity. You know, solar, petroleum, coal, wind, you name it. There's many different ways. But when you look at transportation fuels, we're more than 90% reliant on petroleum. And during and after Sandy, we saw issues with the fuel supply, and we've seen them recently with Harvey and Irma and Maria. Yeah. And I'll talk more about that. But petroleum consumption, more than 70% of the petroleum consumption in the United States is transportation related. Big number. Greenhouse gases, about 27% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the United States relate to transportation. Imported petroleum, not as big of an issue as it was when I first got involved with this, back in 2009, 2010. Those numbers have been steadily going down, but we did see a slight increase this past year. But still, it's about 25% is imported. And, the biggest importer is from Canada, but there's also lots of imports from places that don't necessarily like the United States and subject us to fuel supply disruptions that would be big issues for us. So, and as it blows my mind that the United States actually exports petroleum, natural gas, LNG, but at the same time we're importing, which there's obviously a very complicated story behind that, but something to think about. Again, it's not just about alternative fuels, it's also about idle reduction, and that's really the low-hanging fruit of fuel economy. That's a mouthful. Idle reduction activities, besides just driver habits of not running their car unnecessarily, because there's the old way of thinking that it's more efficient for the engine to leave it on rather than turn it off and turn it back on again. That is outdated. That is not the case anymore. Do not let anybody tell you that it is. But also idle reduction is very important for heavy duty fleets. We work on installing truck stop electrification, which is it's a lot more than it used to be. In the old days, it was basically just plugging in the truck. But now a truck, many truckers that overnight truckers or whatever, when they have to take their breaks, in order for the climate control systems in the cab to continue running, they have to keep the engine on. In order for any refrigeration in the truck to continue operating, they have to keep the engine on. There's lots of new technologies out there now to separate those systems so that they don't have to keep the engine on, and they can run off of electricity or whatever. But truck stop electrification is basically a device that could be inserted into the driver's window or the passenger window, and the driver could literally plug in to that system and not just run the climate and get heat and air conditioning from that system, but now they also get cable, they get internet access, they get everything they need. So that's a major way to reduce petroleum wasted through idling. It's also about right sizing, and it's not business as usual. Many times when I talk to a fleet manager, I ask them why they have a certain vehicle. Why do they need this big, pickup truck for somebody that's, enforcing code issues for their municipality, say. And the answer I always get is, well, that's the way it's always been. No, that doesn't work these days. We can't have that. So we need to right size fleets, not just the number of vehicles, and look more at shared vehicles, but also the size and shape of those vehicles. We need to determine whether you can reassign, replace, or eliminate vehicles without compromising performance, and look at those vehicles and have a replacement schedule, have a maintenance schedule. Look to transition to smaller and lighter vehicles where possible, and in most cases it almost always is possible. And then look at alternative fuels, such as what we'll talk about. But here's a couple of my favorite quotes that I've come across over the years in this. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. That's a famous Henry Ford quote, that comes up a lot now with electric vehicles when people ask, why is it taking so long for electric vehicles? Well, change takes time. We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. That's another one of my favorites. And this one's my absolute favorite. The Stone Age did not end because we ran out of stones, and the oil age will end long before we run out of oil. So just keep all of those in mind, and these are pretty much why I do what I'm doing. So speaking of what I'm doing, here's a couple of the projects that I've been working on over the last couple of years. And whenever you're talking about alternative fuels and alternative fuel vehicles, it's always the chicken and egg situation. What comes first, the vehicle or the fueling infrastructure? I've heard the chicken and egg situation described recently is really more like a hot dog and a bun. You can't have one without the other. You need to have them both at the same time. So, So a couple of these projects, I'll talk a little bit about the CNG fleet and infrastructure program, but just to highlight the EV policy support, this is a contract where I was hired by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection to help them help bring electric vehicles to their attention. This is way back in 2011 when I put this report together. And one of the people from the state just the other day was referring to this report, and he said it's good news and it's bad news. He says it was such a good report that it's still relevant today. And that's the good news and the bad news, because none of the recommendations that were in that report, and this is the bad news side of it, were actually implemented yet. They're just getting around to it now, believe it or not, but I'll take it. It was very funny the way he put that. A couple of the other things, marine vessel engine repower. This was actually a diesel-to-diesel project where we worked with some of the tugboats and other workboats that operate in New York Harbor. We actually did some of the dinner cruises, the circle lines, and replaced old legacy engines, some of which were 30, 40 years old, and that were totally unregulated. And with the assistance of some EPA grant funding, we replaced those with new Tier 3 and Tier 4 engines. And besides the emissions reduction, they are about 35% more fuel efficient. So it's been a great program for everybody involved. One other project is the one on the bottom there, the NJTPA, the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. Through that organization, we're working with 3 pilot communities in northern New Jersey to develop readiness plans for electric vehicles and for compressed natural gas vehicles. And we're also developing a guidebook that other towns could use. And that guidebook should be available in December. And of course, Amanda is actually my client at one of those pilot municipalities. So. Okay, so I talked about the fuel supply disruptions and the need for fuel diversity. This picture, I don't know how many of you folks were in town at the time, but this is right down the street in downtown Hoboken after Superstorm Sandy. And if you remember, there was a major fuel disruption. Fully 11 days after the storm, more than 20% of the stations across the state of New Jersey did not have fuel. And that was for 2 reasons. One, because of the power outages, they couldn't get the fuel out of the ground, out of the tanks. That was for some of them. And some of them totally ran out. The ones that did have power ran out of fuel and couldn't get more. And we actually had gasoline rationing for I don't remember how long, but it was more than a few days. So, among other things, that showed us the importance of fuel diversification. There are several examples of fleets that used alternative fuels, propane, compressed natural gas, even electric, that were able to continue operating during the emergency. And I pointed up the need for not so much first responders, but emergency planners to become more cognizant of the resources that's available to them. What fleets out there use alternative fuels? How can they be used in an emergency if needed? Maybe the first responder fleets themselves should incorporate alternative fuel vehicles. Things like, there was examples of a propane-powered fleet up in Sparta, New Jersey, up in Sussex County. You wouldn't think that Sussex County was affected by the hurricane, but they had lots of trees down. And they had, because of that, they had power disruptions. So the local propane company, which runs their entire fleet on propane, was able to continue operating, and they were delivering propane to people's generators so that they can continue operating. But because the emergency responders couldn't get out, it was the propane fleet that those drivers got out of their trucks and removed the tree limbs and had their chainsaws out there. So they were the ones responding to it. It's also the Atlantic City Jitney Association, which I showed you one of the vehicles before. They took care of all the evacuations from the island of Atlantic City, where other, traditionally fueled vehicles were not able to operate. And that led to a Department of Energy funded grant program that I'm working on that is doing just what I said. It's addressing the need for fuel diversification and working with localities and emergency responders and planners to help them become more aware of the resources that are already out there and what they should be looking at in the future. Another example is out in Long Island. There was a dump truck fleet that ran on compressed natural gas, and they were able to clear the roads on Long Island of all the sand, and only because they operated on CNG. So, bottom line is vehicles cause pollution. There's no two ways about it. So, about 50% of Americans live in areas where the air is unhealthy to breathe. Pretty scary number. Let's talk about the types of pollution. Anybody know what PM 2.5 is? This is what it is. So PM, the 2.5 is 2.5 microns. So that's what it's looked like. But this is a piece of human hair, which is about 50 to 70 microns. So compare that to 2.5. That's how tiny these particles are. And when these particles get in your lungs, these are the health effects from them. Being so small, they get deep into your lungs and virtually undetectable. So about 27% of all the particulate pollution in New Jersey is caused by transportation. And you see some of the other sources here. Ozone, another big pollutant from vehicles. Ozone's a complicated concept. There's actually good ozone and there's bad ozone. So the good ozone is what's up in the protective layer of the atmosphere above the stratosphere. That is being degraded by other factors, not necessarily related to transportation. And you've probably heard about ozone holes in the atmosphere. That's good ozone. We like that ozone. Bad ozone is what's commonly known as smog. And that is caused by the emissions of nitrogen oxides that come from vehicles. That's ground level ozone. And again, about 70% of NOx emissions in New Jersey are from transportation. So the ground level ozone is what's formed when the nitrogen oxides react with other volatile organics and they form smog. This is what happens with too much ozone in the air. sorry to be graphic about this, but the top picture there is a healthy airway. Those are your lungs. You can see it's a clear path. And the lower picture is a lung that's been inflamed due to ozone pollution. And I've heard friends of mine at the DEP refer to ozone pollution as sunburn on your lungs. So, not a pretty picture. And greenhouse gas emissions. I mentioned this earlier, 46% of New Jersey's greenhouse gas emissions are related to transportation. But so think about it. Okay, isn't there regulations that govern this? Why is this still such an issue? Well, the number one source of urban emissions is transportation, is heavy duty, short haul, long haul, school buses, refuse trucks, delivery trucks, all of the above. And 74% of those trucks that are on the road now do not meet the emission standards because they don't have to. The emission standards only apply to new vehicles. So it takes a very long time to get those old vehicles off the road under current scenarios. Which brings me to want to talk about alternative fuels. As I said with the fleet scenario, it's no longer one size fits all. Some of these fuels work differently in different situations. Right now, electric vehicles are primarily for the light-duty consumer passenger vehicle market. Biodiesel, propane, natural gas, those are more suited, better suited for medium and heavy-duty vehicles. Those lines are changing as electric technologies continue to advance. That's going to change over time. And I've been hearing stories of electric trash trucks being deployed in a couple towns in California. Tesla's working on electric heavy-duty vehicle. Some of the other manufacturers are also, but it's going to be many years before they are commercially available at a reasonable price. Yeah.
Are the buses in New York hybrids or electric?
Many buses in New York are hybrid. They don't have any fully electric buses yet. And they also have a lot of CNG buses in New York. New Jersey Transit has, I think, 150 or so compressed natural gas buses, the full-size transit buses. And they just did receive a federal grant to help them offset the cost of their first electric bus. So New Jersey is getting one electric bus. Right now, it's probably 3 times more expensive than a regular bus, and since New Jersey Transit is broke, I hate to say it, but it doesn't make sense for them to spend that extra money. But eventually we'll get there. So let me talk about natural gas. First of all, natural gas is a fossil fuel, and it is readily available now, but thanks to fracking. So there are some issues with natural gas, but I always bring it back to compared to what. Sure, we want to have a perfect clean fuel that well the wheels is clean, but compared to imported diesel fuel, natural gas is much cleaner. And it's also the cleanest burning fuel available for heavy-duty vehicles. Look at the chemical formulas on the second line there. Natural gas is CH4, so 1 carbon compared to diesel, which is 14 carbon molecules. So it's an inherently cleaner burning fuel. And replacing one diesel garbage truck with a natural gas garbage truck is the same emission benefits as taking 325 cars off the road. Pretty significant. And even more for noise reduction, and garbage trucks are obviously operating in communities and neighborhoods. Noise reduction is significant. So a natural gas garbage truck is 90% quieter than a diesel counterpart. And when we first started deploying these, people actually complained because people will complain about anything given the opportunity, but they complained that they didn't hear the truck coming from 2 blocks away, and they didn't get their cans out in time. So, okay, so natural gas can be a lot less than diesel. Right now, with diesel prices low, natural gas is less, but it's not significantly less. But what it is the price of natural gas is much less volatile than diesel. So for a fleet manager or a city manager, trying to plan a budget for a multi-year budget, they know what natural gas is going to cost them. Again, 98% domestically produced, 120 years of reserve. And now, I'll talk more about this, but increasingly available is renewable natural gas. This is gas that is produced from anaerobic digestion, from sewage treatment plants, or food waste recovery, or anything along those lines. It's biogas that's cleaned up to be chemically equivalent to natural gas. And just to emphasize the point, the top line there, the 0.2, that's the current EPA standard for heavy-duty trucks. I actually don't remember what 0.2 what, but I think it's NOx emissions. But a compressed natural gas engine, which has recently been certified by California and EPA as the cleanest heavy-duty trucks available. The natural gas engine is 90% cleaner than the EPA standard, and the cleanest diesel engine meets that EPA standard, but the natural gas engine is 0.02 versus 0.2. So pretty significant emissions benefits. And this is on a well-to-wheels basis. So this includes, production of the natural gas versus production of the diesel. So again, fueling with natural gas reduces CO2, greenhouse gas emissions. With liquefied natural gas, it's an 11% reduction. With compressed natural gas, it's 17% reduction. Pretty significant numbers, on a well-to-wheels basis. And when you combine the latest natural gas engines with the renewable natural gas, it's significantly cleaner. And as I mentioned, it likely will remain so for the next decade or so until the new technologies come along and become commercially available. But if you look at the carbon intensity rating, conventional diesel fuels is 102, but using renewable natural gas generated from food waste, it's negative. It's actually negative carbon intensity. So on a life cycle basis, it's extremely beneficial from a carbon intensity standpoint. And something, I know a lot of you, going to be looking for jobs coming up soon. I should tell you that I'm involved in a big development project that hasn't been announced yet, but it is a food waste collection facility that's going to be developing anaerobic digestion and generating biogas. It's going to be based in Newark, and it's the first of what we hope will be many of these across the world, actually. So from that process, we will be collecting the food waste, putting it through the digestion process, and then that generates the renewable natural gas, and it also generates organic fertilizer. So a pretty cool project.
Quick question. How scalable is it? Basically at the aggregate level, what's the energy content of all waste? And also given that we are trying to minimize the waste, is it just a lab thing?
So anaerobic digestion, the technology has been around for years. It's basically a decomposition process that's done in the absence of oxygen. So
my question is about the scale of feedstock in this process. How much input can we get?
So, well, it depends on what you're talking about, whether it's farm waste or food waste or any organic material really can be digested like that.
Because it reminds me a little bit of the second advanced biofuels and all this, corn store, etc. But then when you're trying to visualize the scaled up scenario, you need like huge amount of, because these are very less energy dense inputs. It's not like coal and gas, which contains a lot of energy. So at the end, you will realize that you can only fuel maybe 1% of the fuel if you...
Well, which is okay, because as I said, there's no one size fits all. There's no one technology. There's no silver bullet. It's going to be a combination of things. And I hate to use the expression all of the above, or but it really is. And again, some technologies will work better in different situations than others. If we can do this project in Newark, it diverts the food waste from landfills. It solves, that helps solve that big issue. And we can do it in a circular manner, so the food waste that's generated in Newark can be processed in Newark, turned into gas in Newark, and used to fuel the trash trucks. So that's the type of scale. This is not going to solve the world's problems, but it's just another tool.
Yeah, if I can add to it, Ahmed, like many organizations have started this in a much smaller scale. Even Stevens has its own anaerobic digester. So like again, the idea is to connect it to the cogen plant. So what they are doing is in a much larger scale, like taking like stuff directly from the local community. So hopefully that would be a very successful venture.
Sure, I'm just trying to see the maximum share in the portfolio of all solutions, so you're saying.
A whole city approach, to my knowledge, hasn't been done yet.
Right.
But so it's scaled up from an individual farm or a lab on a campus, to take your dining hall waste to whatever. So just an example of putting all of this to use. This was a project that we had. This was actually a $15 million grant that we were awarded from the Department of Energy. And we used that to leverage about $36 million of non-federal money. And again, that money probably would not have been spent in New Jersey otherwise. But we worked with 15 fleets, public and private fleets across the state, and transitioned them. We got rid of their diesel trucks and got CNG trucks for them. We put in 6 fueling stations across the state. And just this project alone displaces more than 2 million gallons of petroleum a year and 900,000 pounds of criteria pollutants. So a very successful project, and every one of the fleets that was involved in this project, with the help of the federal money, but everyone since has increased the number of CNG vehicles that they have, which is a great sign. And other fleets in the area of those stations that we put in are also converting those fleets. So let's move on to electric vehicles. So I talked about CNG in the context of heavy-duty trucks. Electric vehicles are something totally different right now. This is a picture, this is an actual picture of Thomas Edison's home charging station from 1911-ish that is at the Edison Museum in West Orange. This thing looks like something out of a Frankenstein movie with dials and gadgets and all that. I was afraid to touch it. But that's it. I mean, I don't know if it works or not. Wasn't about to go near it. But anyway, and then that's Thomas Edison's car, electric vehicle. I'm sure you can't see it, but it does. The license plate is New Jersey registered. Edison actually, I don't know if this was the vehicle or not, but Henry Ford actually gave Mrs. Edison an electric vehicle because he felt that gasoline or the kerosene, I guess they were using at the time, was too dirty a fuel for women. So he gave her an electric vehicle. This is the Edison Lab, National Park Service Edison Lab. A couple of weeks ago, we had an event there where at the same site, literally at the same site, where there's pictures of this electric vehicle from the early 1900s with we had a BMW i3 there, and BMW just donated a couple charging stations to the National Park Service to have at their parks and historical sites. So pretty cool ceremony. So the thing with the electric vehicles, they will continue to get cleaner over time. As the grid itself cleans up, electric vehicles will get cleaner. Here in New Jersey, we have one of the cleanest mix of generation assets in the country. You know, so whenever I talk about electric vehicles, I always get, you know, aren't you just replacing the emissions from the tailpipe with smokestack emissions from generating facilities? Well, not in New Jersey. And in fact, not anywhere in the country these days. For a while, some of the Midwest states that relied on coal, it was close whether electric vehicles were actually cleaner or not. But now that coal is being phased out and hopefully will remain phased out, you know, our electric generation is very clean. Here's another example of that. There's actually a Department of Energy website that you could plug in your zip code or anything like that, and it'll show you what the annual emissions for different types of vehicles are based on the electricity that serves your particular market. And you see that, you know, the large majority of electric generation in New Jersey is natural gas and nuclear. Very, very clean generation. And again, in fact, only 4% of the NOx in New Jersey comes from power plants. So when you talk about electric vehicles, there's basically 4 technologies out there. And, you know, just start throwing stuff at me if this is basic information or if you guys know this or not. But so there's plug-in hybrids, there's fully battery electric, 100% battery electric vehicles. There's battery electric with range extenders. Some of those work in different ways. Some generate electricity to recharge the battery while it's in motion, and those are gasoline. Or some are true hybrids that, you know, run on electric or run on gasoline. And then there's hydrogen fuel cells, which is an up-and-coming technology. I'll talk a little bit more about that. All of the major automakers are coming out with, or are out with hydrogen fuel cell vehicles right now. Yes?
5 minutes.
Oh, okay. I thought you. Okay, so benefits of electric vehicles. Fuel cost savings, obviously. Savings on maintenance. There's so many fewer moving parts on an electric vehicle that the maintenance is extremely simple. You know, I mentioned tailpipe emissions from electric vehicles. Well, guess what? There's no tailpipe on electric vehicles, so obviously there's no emissions. Lower environmental impact and energy security. And you know, and this is a pretty basic slide, but what I like is the pictures of these actual license plates in New Jersey. One's no CO2 for you, and F OPEC, which is one of my favorites. So why has it taken so long? It's all about the batteries. The power density, the cost, the weight, the battery life has, you can see on that graph, on both of those graphs, the costs have gone down tremendously over the past couple of years. It's really, the leaps in technology have been fascinating to watch, and they're still going on. And the battery weight, you know, the weight of the vehicle obviously has a lot to do with the range and with the impact of the vehicle. So 200-mile plus electric vehicles are on the road now. That is the new standard. Not to say that all electric vehicles out there can hit that, but that's the new standard. And since 2012, the range of electric vehicles has increased by 2.5 times, and they're selling for about the same price. In fact, the new Leaf is is 40% increase in range, and it costs less than the previous model. And sales are responding, the market is responding, and all of the major car companies have announced plans to increase the models available, and some of them have even announced that they will be phasing out internal combustion engines. Volvo, for example, recently came out with an announcement that, I forget what year, but they are planning to do away. They're only going to be electric technologies. You know, it wasn't long ago that I actually knew every electric vehicle driver in the state of New Jersey personally, which is a pretty funny thing to say, I guess, but now there's almost 13,000 of them. That was as of July. That number's gone up significantly since. So pretty steep curve to the positive. So you know, people say, why is it taking so long? Well, you know, in the scheme of things, it's not really taking that long. And there's plenty of activity in New Jersey. The picture on the right is a friend of mine's restaurant in Montclair, and the other picture are Amanda's vehicles in Secaucus. Not a great picture, but tough glare that day. Those are, you want to talk about those?
Yeah, we actually leased those cars 3 years ago. One is for our recycling enforcement official, and the other one's for my department. And they're fully electric vehicles. They go 60 miles per charge, and it takes about 4 hours to charge. And actually, that's a new charging station that we just got a grant for from the DEP, which actually Chuck kind of helped us with figuring out where to place them throughout town, because we got 4 with the grant.
And my thanks for doing that is getting invited here. Right. So charging hierarchy. So when you're charging electric vehicles, you know, there's some terminology, as with anything, that you need to be familiar with. But the bulk of the charging, most of the charging, most of the time, will be done by people at home. But not everybody can do that, as you know, we saw in Secaucus and elsewhere. Multifamily housing, unless you have a private house with a driveway, you're not going to be able to charge at home. Those are challenges that have to be overcome. One way around that is to have workplace charging. So people that drive to work can plug in the company parking lot or garage on campus here, and charge while they're at work. And the other least popular, if you will, is public charging stations. And this, you know, in the interest of time, we'll leave it at that for now. But you know, we're seeing more and more intercity fast charging available. But you know, I know Secaucus has charging stations at the library now. You know, it's what you call opportunity charging. So you're not going to get the bulk of your charging there, but if you see a charging station, it's like with a cell phone, you know, you automatically plug it in wherever you can. If you have the opportunity to charge at a public station, you will, but you don't rely on it. So there's 3 different levels of charging. Level 1 is obviously just a regular wall outlet. Level 2 is more like the 3-pronged dryer outlet, and DC fast charging. And the time that it takes to charge using these different opportunities varies greatly. Interesting thing I just heard yesterday, I think it is Amazon, that you know, one of the things with electric vehicles, what if you run out of power on the road and you don't have an opportunity to charge? Amazon just got a patent for a drone charging station. They will deploy, you know, they're developing this now, but they will deploy a drone to you if you have an emergency service with them. They'll deploy a drone that will charge your vehicle on the road. Very cool. It's like, you know, what are they going to think of next? But, you know, that's the emergency road service of the future. But these are PSE&G DC fast chargers that just went up on at the rest stops along the New Jersey Turnpike. You see the charging stations across the state, the publicly accessible charging stations are pretty well dispersed. So, you know, you can usually find one. And there are a number of incentives in the state of New Jersey that, you know, we don't need to go into right now. One thing that always gets me is the high occupancy lane access, which is hugely successful in California in getting people to use electric vehicles. But, you know, you could do that in New Jersey too, but I defy anybody in this room to tell me where there is a high occupancy lane in New Jersey. So the regulations say that if you have one?
Isn't there one on the turnpike? Like, cause I come from South Jersey every now and then, I drive between exit 11 and 14. I'm pretty sure that there is
I don't think so. I think there's one for a short stretch near the George Washington Bridge
That's
at the
one
end
that
of the
I'm familiar with.
Okay, but I don't think there's any along the bulk of the turnpike.
When you say high occupancy vehicle, you mean basically the carpool lane,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
I'm almost certain there is a lane on the turnpike.
Okay. In any case, it's not enough to modify anybody's behavior like it has been in California. So just a couple of other points real quick. Vehicle electrification, it's not just about the drive systems. Start-stop technology is something that's catching on now. You know, Toyota Prius, the original Prius, was the first time that I had seen this, where you actually go to a red light and stop and the engine shuts off. And you're like, you know, what happened to my car? But, you know, then you just step on the gas and it starts up again. So this is new technology. It's being deployed now in the heavy-duty truck market, which is huge, and that's new technology. And just about every new vehicle is going to have that. And then there's the whole thing with connected vehicles. You know, you don't even think about how this has snuck into vehicle technology in new cars these days. You know, all your smartphone apps, your navigation, you know, parking assist now, getting into autonomous vehicles and semi-autonomous vehicles, and the wireless technologies that are coming down soon, and you know, vehicle-to-vehicle communications, vehicle-to-infrastructure communications, and vehicle-to-grid, so that, you know, during peak power time on a summer afternoon, you know, maybe at some point in the future you could plug your vehicle in, and instead of getting a charge from the grid, you could put power back to the grid and get paid by the utility for that. You know, that's coming. It's not quite here yet, but it's coming. So, and then you can charge up at an off-peak hour. You can charge your vehicle at an off-peak hour when you don't need it. So, hydrogen fuel cells, you know, real quick, those are, you know, the only emissions from a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle is water. It needs to be a couple leaps in technology to make these commercially viable, but some of the automakers are really investing an awful lot of money into it. But right now there's no economically or environmentally sustainable way of mass producing the hydrogen. It's the most common element on Earth, but it's not found by itself. You have to separate it from something else. Just real quick about car sharing. Big thing about car sharing, and you guys obviously all are probably more familiar with Uber and Lyft and all that than I am, but the thing about it is lower fixed costs and higher variable costs. So in addition to taking cars off the road by being available, it makes the driver think about whether or not, you know, what modes of transportation are available for this trip. Should I walk? Should I take public transit? Or should I call, you know, a shared car? So it's really a evolving transportation demand management strategy. And it's big business. But, you know, there are definitely logistical challenges for introducing electric vehicles into car shares, but that's a great opportunity to get people familiar with electric vehicles and to get people that might not otherwise have used them to try them out. So you know, it's financial. Car sharing allows people who might not otherwise be able to afford a car, to own a car, to actually be able to use a car. You know, lots of things about car sharing that you don't really think about, but reduced parking demand, which is also a huge factor. So more information. I think I crammed a lot into this hour, but it's something called the Alternative Fuel Data Center. It's a Department of Energy website, AFDC. You can spend hours on this website just following all the links. If you're interested in the subject, I encourage you to look at it. And one of the other tools is the station locator. So you can go onto this website and find every alternative fuel station in any geography that you're looking at. You can type in any fuel and sort it that way. You could plan your routes. You could look at, you know, if you want to see every electric vehicle charging station within 10 miles of Hoboken, you know, you can do that as well. And that's it. Time's up.